Don't you dare. What the fuck? Oh, children. Hello, Jacksonites, and welcome to episode 54 of Super Kaiju Binge. Today, me and good old Seanie Boy from JT is Reborn.
Hey, everyone. I had to get in before Nick. Excuse me.
We'll be reviewing the painfully, criminally, woefully underlooked and underappreciated Godzilla movie of the potentially the most of the entire franchise. With 1989's Godzilla versus Biollante. We both have the same release from the same year. Because believe you me, there's a history into this movie. Seanie Boy, since you're my guest, you can go through your personal history first.
Well, Godzilla vs. Biollante, up until 2014, was the last Godzilla film I had not seen. This is the hardest Godzilla film to come by because I didn't have the VHS of it growing up. And the only reason I got the DVD at the time, because I was working at Best Buy, this is probably like 2012, maybe. Yeah, I think this was 2012. And then I just happened to be walking around. I'm like, oh, it's the one Godzilla film I don't own. Snatch. And so I bought it, and then I finally watched it. And, you know, I like a lot of elements to it, but I think, too, because this is the one Heisei film I didn't really grow up with. So it didn't, leave as much an impact on me. I think maybe if I'd seen this at a young age, then that might be a bit different. But it's been over a decade. I've seen this thing a couple times over the years, but it's not one I generally go back to revisit to all that often. But there are some really good aspects to it. So, but I was happy that I finally got the chance to see. I mean, the excitement on my face when I finally saw this DVD at Best Buy, before they're getting rid of all the physical media, which is really kind of sad to see. I understand kind of why they're doing it, because people just aren't buying like they used to. But that's where we're at these days. Streaming. We're just cable 2.0, and now things aren't going to be preserved better. So, but so finally got the chance to do this. This is the only Godzilla film where I do not have a Blu-ray copy of, mainly because the Blu-ray and everything trying to find this movie is ridiculously out of print and overpriced. But I am glad I got this thing when I did. Hopefully we get some sort of remastering re-release with this thing, because the rights when it comes to Godzilla movies, generally awful. It is hard to find anything in terms of physical media for some of the older Godzilla films. The Millennium era, super easy. You can get a DVD or Blu-ray regardless. I mean, so it's out of print now at this point, a lot of those, but you can probably find it pretty cheap. Heisei era, this is the one most elusive Godzilla film to try and find. I mean, we got lucky when this DVD was out, because we just snatched it up when we could, and now when you try to go to find it, it's ridiculously overpriced. It's, it's kind of a pain, but... And also, I think, too, at least for the special features on this one, they had to, re-release a new version of it without it, if I'm not mistaken. Or was that Godzilla vs. Megalon?
That was Megalon, yeah.
Okay. I think my version of Megalon has the special features, but I don't 100% recall. But Megalon is the one I also have on DVD and Blu-ray. So, because, I mean, I have the Showa collection. So...
The Criterion set?
Yeah, the Criterion set, which... To be fair, the Criterion set doesn't include every version of the movie, which I think is a disappointment. But that's why I have my DVDs, so I at least keep numerous copies of these films in some capacity. The best release, I think, was that Gamera Blu-ray set, which had all the films and all the different versions you could possibly have, plus the comic book and all that. Now that's a perfect release. The Showa collection definitely has its faults, but I'm glad I still have it on Blu-ray. So, but it has the Japanese cut of King Kong versus Godzilla.
Yeah, so that was the selling point for me right there for that.
And the way they got around that was releasing it as a special feature, classifying it as a special feature or something. So, but yeah, Godzilla vs. Biollante, this one gave us a really creative, original monster. So you got to give it props for that. And then again, this is probably I think due to the release issues with this one, I think that's part of why it's not as highly praised, because this is a hard movie to come by, especially compared to some of the other films. This one doesn't get brought up as much. It tried to do something different, and it wasn't kind of the rest of the Heisei era where they just brought back classic monsters. Well, Destroya was new, but you get my point. Because after this, we get King Ghidorah gets brought back, then Mothra gets brought back, then Mechagodzilla gets brought back. I mean, then we had Space Godzilla, but you still like, I mean, this one really kind of took something kind of creative and original with its concept and fusing Godzilla's DNA to kind of create something new, because that was new for
Alrighty.
the series when you think about it. So, but anyways, I digress. Tell me your history, Nick, with this movie.
Godzilla versus Biollante. For a long time, this was at the very top of my Godzilla hit list. Like, I was very, very, very interested in seeing this film for a long, long time. This one really seemed unique and original to me. And there's a lot of elements that seemed like they would really strongly resonate with me. But I always was so incredibly frustrated due to it being very similar to the Return of Godzilla. It was always unavailable for so long. This one frustrated me even more so because it's a Godzilla versus monster movie, but the monster in question that Godzilla's fighting looked always really cool to me. So this one would drive me insane how elusive it was for so long. But also kind of similar to Return of Godzilla and Gamera the Brave, at some point I just kind of accepted that I probably never would see this movie. Um, that always made me really sad because I always really wanted to see it, but I just was like, I have no way, so I may as well just let it go. Um, but the first time I saw Godzilla versus Biollante, uh, well, first off, I first like saw image and footage of it through James Rolfe when he did his Godzilla-thon, but I think that's one of the shortest videos of the entire marathon.
Yeah, I
So
think so too. Well, he had to change it too. I remember that because it was never released, and they added in theatrically. It was, however, released on VHS, and they kind of added that little addition to it when he made it. I just remember because I was really excited watching Godzilla-thon back in the day. You know what, Nick? We did see a snippet of footage in Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla of Biollante. That was the first time I saw Biollante like in some sort of film capacity.
that is true, but you literally see Biollante for literally a snap of a finger. But
Right.
anyway, I also remember seeing the final battle from this movie on YouTube, and that was like really, really, really ignited my interest in seeing this film. But then I realized, yeah, this is nowhere to be found. But the very first time that I saw this movie, I do not know how she came to own this. When I was in high school, I had a girlfriend, and her mother is also a huge kaiju fan. Specifically, she's more of a Gamera fan, but I remember telling her that Biollante was one of few that I'd never seen, and it was one that I was really interested in. And she herself owned, I think it was it was either a torrent or a unlicensed download, or it was a bootleg.
Pretty
But
much the same things.
well, I mean, yes, but so yeah, she set it up on her laptop and she said, "Here you go, you watch this." So I was like, "Wait, really? Yeah, go right ahead. I don't care." Lisa is her name. Ironically, it's the name of my mom too. Yeah, Lisa let me watch her copy of Godzilla versus Biollante, and I sat down and I watched it in one sitting, and I was like, the whole time. It was such a surreal experience for me. Surely you've experienced those. A movie that you sought after for so long and you always wanted to see, and then you finally get the opportunity to watch it for the first time. It's a very surreal, almost otherworldly experience, isn't it?
It is. It is. Or like when you're trying to get something to your collection and you've been looking so long and hard to find it, or when you finally complete something. I think part of it too is when you don't own something, you like it more. Like especially when I
Yeah.
was younger, because there's a lot of films that I wanted to see growing up, and I could only see maybe if there's snippets of it on TV. But trying to seek out the actual film when I didn't own it or really had a job back then to kind of like purchase something on my own. Like when you finally complete a collection or something, that is a special feeling. The first set I ever got like to complete a movie series was the Jaws series, and then that was me trying to find Jaws 2 at Best Buy. So I like my mom would take me there, like, all right, we're gonna go look for this movie, and then I finally found it as a kid. I'm like, yes, it's here. And then I finally sat down and watched the whole thing because I could only see snippets of it on TV. And the first film obviously was like my favorite movie. And so finally getting the DVD and watching it in all its glory, I was like, yes, this is awesome. But that was kind of my Biollante experience. But that one's like more easy, accessible to find. This one, on the other hand, was
not. Yeah, Godzilla vs. Biollante was released on DVD and Blu-ray for the first time in 2012.
That's when I got it.
And
That's when I got it, 2012. So
I got it, I think, in 2013, but I did know of its existence because at the time I was still subscribed to the Kaiju YouTuber Zazubar, and he did a full-on review of the 2012 Blu-ray release, like talking about its special features, talk a little bit about the movie, and like, you know, announcing that, yeah, finally this movie is available for US viewing. So I was like, I gotta get my hands on that. So I got this movie on DVD in 2013, along with Godzilla versus King Ghidorah and Mothra on DVD, and The Green Mile of all things on DVD.
Great movie.
It was a Christmas gift from an Amazon card that my aunt had given to me, amazingly. So, and those were, I was like this close to completing the Godzilla franchise at that point, and those two discs were ones in particular that I was really wanting to get, because aside from the Return of Godzilla, those were the last Heisei films that I hadn't owned. So I managed to complete that before 2016. So yeah, I got it in the mail. I sat down and I watched it for the second time, and I liked it a little bit more. Similar to the Return of Godzilla, I have only seen Biollante a handful of times, and I do similarly as well have kind of a very limited amount of nostalgia and feelings towards. But unlike the Return of Godzilla, I do consider Biollante to be one of my favorite Godzilla movies. Upon this most recent viewing, I definitely do think it is a bit lower on that favorites list, mainly just due to me having limited nostalgia and feelings towards. But still, what does work for me with this movie strongly resonates with me, as I suspected when I was a kid. And yeah, I can definitively say this is one of my favorites. I'm a big fan of this film. So, Godzilla vs. Biollante is a 1989 Japanese kaiju film written and directed by Kazuki Omori. Did he also do Return of Godzilla?
I think he did a few, maybe like, I think he did at least one more. I'll have to look it up.
No, he didn't. That was Koji Hashimoto. Never mind. Okay. Because that name sounds familiar. Kazuki Omori.
Mm-hmm.
With special effects by the debut of Koichi Kawakita. Mm-hmm. Distributed by Toho and produced under their subsidiary Toho Pictures, it is the 17th film in the Godzilla franchise, the second film in the franchise's Heisei era, and is a direct sequel to 1984's The Return of Godzilla.
Also, Nick, I was just looking, so I went back to kind of check when I first got the entire Godzilla series. It was 2014. But there's still one film I think we need left. Well, I mean, they got released the anime trilogy, which I want for completion purposes, and the Shinkelian movie here. But we need that Godzilla vs. the Wolfman lost film, I think, at some point. That one's kind of elusive, and there's footage of it out there, and it fits in that era, too. So that'd be one. I know it's not officially canon, but, I mean, come on, Toho, make some money off it.
Well, while they're at it, why don't they release Zone Fighter on DVD too?
Yes,
I'd
Zone
rather have
Fighter.
that first.
Zone Fighter, I got like a copy of it at G Fest, but I guess it was a bootleg and it doesn't have any subtitles, so I have no idea what's happening in anything. I just need to learn Japanese. That's where it needs to, change.
In the film, corporations struggle for control over samples of Godzilla's cells, while the monster itself battles a creature born from a combination of Godzilla cells, the cells of a plant, and the cells of a woman. The idea originated from a public story writing contest and set a trend common to all Heisei era movies, in which Godzilla faces off against opponents capable of metamorphosizing into new, progressively more powerful forms. Godzilla vs. Biollante was released theatrically in Japan December 16th, 1989, 35 years ago, at least this year. It received generally positive reviews who praised the storyline, visual effects, and Sugiyama's score, but it sadly was a box office disappointment in Japan due to competition with Back to the Future Part 2. It did receive a direct-to-video release in the US November 25th, 1992 through HBO Video. And talking about that public story writing contest, I got a little bit of trivia for you. So this is nothing new for the Godzilla franchise. Toho reaching out to the fans and saying, "Hey, why don't you guys submit an idea and we can
Give you some money and then you get some story credit.
yeah. So
Jet Jaguar was created by kids.
yep, Jet Jaguar was I think the first time that they had ever done that and reached out to fans and say, "Hey, why don't you give us an idea?" And then they turned around and completely changed it into something unrecognizable.
But
um,
the kid got some sort of credit, I'm sure.
but um it's not just Toho that's done that. So back in 1971, when the Return of Ultraman series was released, Tsuburaya Productions decided they wanted to do the same thing and reach out to their fans and say, "Hey, why don't you give us a few kaiju ideas?" And one of the monsters they chose, a kid submitted the monster Leogon. Uh, and the fun fact, that same kid who created Leogon for the Return of Ultraman, years later, was also chosen, and he's the one who submitted the idea for Godzilla vs. Biollante. And it's funny that in both of these movies, the antagonistic monster is created by hybridizing reptilian DNA with plant DNA. Leogon is a monster plant animal thing hybrid, and Biollante is a Godzilla plant hybrid. So it's funny how what goes around comes around.
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty, so we're going to jump back and forth with the plot before we jump into development. So
Oh.
I'll go first.
Where am I at here? Or just am I just reading Wikipedia or something?
Yeah.
In the aftermath of Godzilla's attack on Tokyo and later imprisonment at Mount Mihara in 1985, the monster cells are secretly delivered to the Suradia Institute of Technology and Science, where they are to be merged with genetically modified plants in the hope of transforming Suradia's deserts into fertile land and ending the country's economic dependence on oil wells. Dr. Genshiro Shiragami and his daughter Erika are enlisted to aid with the project, but a terrorist bombing destroys the institute's laboratory, ruining the cells and killing Erika.
5 years later, Shiragami has returned to Japan. Wait, this takes place in 1990?
Well, I mean, 84. Well, because it was 80. Well, 84, 89. Because, Godzilla 84 was actually 84, not 85, except in the States. I don't know. It doesn't matter. This is the writing here. Hello, Big Jack Films.
Oh, Jackie Boy's here.
Yep. And we also have LBT Electric Dino 75, who likes my blue Jurassic World thing.
Cool.
I guess I'll read Nick. 5 years later, Shiragami has returned to Japan and merged some of Erika's cells with those of a rose in an attempt to preserve her soul. I feel like the soul and body are separate, but that's okay. Meanwhile, scientists Kazuhito Kirishima and Lieutenant Goro Gondo of the JSDF are using Godzilla cells they collect to create anti-nuclear energy bacteria, ANEB, if you want to pronounce it that way, hoping it can serve as a weapon against Godzilla should it return. They attempt to recruit Shiragami to aid them, but are rebuffed. International tensions increase over the Godzilla cells as they are coveted by both the Soradia Institute of Technology and Science and the American Biomajor Organization. An explosion from Mount Mihara causes tremors across the area, including Shiragami's home, badly damaging the roses. Shiragami agrees to join the JSDF's effort and is given access to the Godzilla cells, which he secretly merges one of the roses. The night later, rival Biomajor and Seradian agents break into Shiragami's lab, but are attacked by a larger plant-like creature, which later escapes to Lake Ashi and is named Biollante by Shiragami.
Also, fun fact, in that episode with Leogon in the Return of Ultraman, Ultraman battles Leogon in Lake Ashi.
It's all connected.
Biomajor agents plant explosives around Mount Mahara and blackmail the Diet of Japan, warning the explosives will be detonated and thus free Godzilla if these cells are not handed over.
That's kind of weird how it's called the Diet of Japan. Like, I mean, are they like, is it a fitness thing?
Kirishima and Gondo attempt to trade, but the Seradian agent SSS-9 thwarts the attempt and escapes with the cells. The explosives are detonated, and Godzilla is released in one of the most badass images of the entire franchise.
It's one of my favorite. It's my favorite moment in the entire movie because like you have the guys when he gets blown up, they're just like, oh shit, like just that they're just screwed.
Godzilla attempts to reach the nearest power plant to replenish its supply of nuclear energy, but Biollante calls out to Godzilla. Godzilla arrives at the lake to engage Biollante in a vicious battle and emerges as the victor. Godzilla then proceeds toward the power plant at Suruga, but psychic Miki Sagusa, her first appearance in the Heisei series, uses her powers to divert it towards Osaka instead. The city is quickly evacuated before Godzilla makes landfall. A team led by Gondo meet Godzilla at the Central District and fire rockets infused with the ANEB into its body. Gondo is killed in the process, and Godzilla leaves unharmed. I'll get this one too, since you got the first two.
Okay, sounds good.
There's only 4 paragraphs. Kirishima recovers the cells and returns them to the JSDF. Shiragami theorizes that if Godzilla's body temperature is increased, that's not how cold-blooded individuals work, but whatever, the ANEB should work against him. The JSDF erects microwave-emitting plants shut up during an artificial thunderstorm, hitting Godzilla with lightning and heating up its body temperature during a battle near the shores of Wakasa Bay. Godzilla is only moderately affected, but Biollante, having obtained a more powerful form, arrives to engage Godzilla in battle once again. Shut up, it's not funny. After a long battle, the fight ends after Godzilla fires an atomic heat ray inside Biollante's mouth, severely injuring her. I guess you could say he literally blew her back out. An exhausted Godzilla... And it's even nastier because they're siblings, too.
Yeah, she's been taking back shots from Godzilla.
Those are like a friggin' probably an ocean coming out.
Yep. Moving on.
Well, I mean, technically it was in her mouth, so you're shooting a load in her mouth or something. I mean, that works too.
An exhausted Godzilla collapses on the beach as the bacterial infection finally takes hold. And Biollante splits apart into glowing spores, which rise into the sky, forming an image of Erika among the stars. Shiragami, watching the scene, is shot by SSS-9. Kirishima chases the assassin, and after a brief scuffle, SSS-9 is killed by a microwave emitting plate activated by Sho Kuroki.
That's my favorite. It's the funniest scene in the movie because all of a sudden it's like, boop. There's no scream or anything. It's just like, wipe him out.
You could say he was waved away in a microsecond. Godzilla reawakens and leaves for the ocean, leaving the characters to lament the events of the film. So, how about this plot, Sean?
Well, it actually is a pretty interesting plot. I mean, we get a bit of the fallout of Godzilla's return and Return to Godzilla, something like a lot of Godzilla films don't necessarily explore because, I mean, it's kind of almost like episodic where Godzilla's attacked so many things over the course of different films. But in this case, we get the direct fallout of that. You get to see how people are kind of taking his cells and trying to experiment on them. And we get to see the consequences of it. It kind of feels almost Jurassic Park before that in a way where they're experimenting with Godzilla DNA and it inevitably creates something that's like really dangerous and mix it. I don't know why he decides to mix it with that of a plant. I guess to save his daughter's soul, but she's kind of already gone. But again, Shiragami actually is kind of an interesting character and his means to kind of cope with the grief of losing his daughter, if you will. So, like I said, I think the storyline's kind of interesting. Yeah, I like how different bits of governments are kind of fighting over Godzilla's DNA to see what they can kind of do with it.
Race.
Yeah, it's like another arms race in a way. And the methodology they used to try and stop Godzilla by using the using his cells against him, I thought that was kind of creative. And plus, we get Biollante, who I think is one of the most unique monsters in the Godzilla franchise. And it's something we haven't really explored too much of, like man-made kaiju in a way. Like people experiment and they create something. I mean, we've had mechanized things, but biologically created titans, if you will, is something I want to see explored in future films. I know King of the Monsters kind of hinted at some of this stuff going on with the market dealings with Titan DNA and all the things you can kind of do with it. But this is something like the genetic power, if you will. I mean, the recent Jurassic World movies kind of utilize weaponizing dinosaurs or something in a way. It didn't fully work, but that was still kind of an interesting kind of thing to do with the dinosaurs, if you will, just kind of creating something and what you can kind of do with that. But I don't know. It was like, I thought it was an interesting storyline. It's not just Godzilla fights another monster. It's kind of a man-made one. It's dealing with the fallout and that. You have a lot of various moving pieces with it. So I don't know. I think the plot line is kind of what elevates this one above some other Godzilla films in a way. Now, it's not necessarily like my favorite, or I don't think it's as executed as well as it could be, but I still think it's an interesting enough story, and the concept alone feels kind of fresh for the series.
Alrighty. Okay, so in my opinion, this is one of the most unique and memorable and also underlooked, like I said, and underappreciated Godzilla movies of the franchise. I really like this movie's plot. I want to get into this a little bit more with one of my pros, but I do like how this picks up right after the events of 1984, which is something you don't see very often in the world of tokusatsu. Which
continuity.
Yeah, we don't really see continuity very much, which is really frustrating. I really wish the the Japanese side of the Godzilla franchise would go back to doing that, but we're not going to get into that right now. But I like how this plot, it does feel like the natural continuation of the Return of Godzilla. And I like how it carries over a lot of elements from the previous film and perfects them, in my opinion, but then adds another monster into the mix and starts to expand on Godzilla's effect on the entire world and many aspects of the entire world. Now, the existence of Godzilla not only creates international panic, it also creates another international arms race, which I think is one of the most fascinating aspects of this movie. We just see these people squabbling amongst themselves constantly over getting their hands on just a sample of Godzilla's skin. It's kind of disgusting, but it's enthralling, but it also is a bit chilling because we see shit like this happen all the time. Like if something like this was to happen in real life, I'd bet you the exact same thing would happen, probably on a more massive scale, in my opinion. But yeah, I love this movie's plot. It also adds and introduces kind of like what Sean said. Yeah, we don't see man-made monsters very often in the Godzilla franchise. I think
Mechas for sure, but not man-made, like
um,
Biollante.
I think that's a really, really unique and fascinating and underappreciated concept that I wish Tokusatsu overall would take more advantage of. We see cybernetic and mechanical stuff all the time, but like what Sean said, seeing biological warfare being used on monsters and also bioengineered kaiju is a very underrated concept, in my opinion.
It's kind
And
of a
I think,
scarier one too, because it's like biological warfare is scarier than just like arms. I mean, even in the Kaiju series, I mean, we had like the oxygen destroyer, which is pretty much like a biological weapon in a lot of ways.
yeah, I would say that. Yeah, well,
It's
it's
a
a
chemical
chemical
weapon.
compound. Yeah.
Right, right. So, but like seeing that explored in kaiju films is something I feel like we haven't like this one. Like it kind of it starts it, but we don't really get as much explored it as much as I think it could be done. I feel like even like
No.
the in the Millennium series, they kind of teased that at the end of Tokyo SOS with that post credit scene with the Godzilla DNA and other Titans being kind of saved up, but it just never went anywhere because the next film was Final Wars. But that's something I really want to see explored more with like, you know, I want to keep saying Titans because Monster versus Kaiju Titans, if you will. Like, I want to see that aspect explored more in future Godzilla films because I feel like we just haven't gotten enough of that. And Biollante is one to really kind of dive into that. And that's one of the things that makes it stand out because it explores this in an interesting kind of way. Would have liked a little bit more and done things a little bit differently, but I think the concept is really interesting. So
All righty. So I'm going to go over a little bit of the development of this film, mainly just the pre-production section.
mhm.
Um, I'll get into the special effects later on. Alrighty, so Tomoyuki Tanaka had announced a sequel to The Return of Godzilla in 1985, but was skeptical of its possibilities as the film had been of little financial benefit to Toho, and the failure of King Kong Lives the following year convinced him that audiences were not ready for a continuation of the Godzilla series.
King Kong Lives, that piece of crap.
He relented after the success of Little Shop of Horrors and proceeded to hold a public story writing contest for a possible script. In consideration of the return of Godzilla's marginal success in Japan, Tanaka insisted that the story focus on a classic monster versus monster theme. Tanaka handed the 5 finalist entries to director Kazuki Omori, despite the two's initially hostile relationship. The latter had previously held Tanaka responsible for the decline of the Godzilla series quality during the 1970s. Omori chose the entry of dentist Shinichiro Kobayashi, who wrote his story with the hypothetical death of his daughter in mind. Kobayashi's submission was notable for its emphasis on dilemmas concerning biotech rather than nuclear energy, and revolved around a scientist grieving for his deceased daughter and attempted to keep her alive by merging her genes with those of a plant. The scientist's initial experiments would have resulted in the creation of a giant rat-like amphibian known as Deutelos, which would have landed in Tokyo Bay and been killed by Godzilla. A female reporter investigating the scientist's activities, which also, fun fact, there would have been a scene. Deutelos almost made it into this movie, and there would have been a scene that would have showcased Godzilla actually eating the corpse of a dead Deutelos to showcase that Godzilla is indeed carnivorous. But they thought that was a bit too gruesome for an already kind of more gruesome than usual Godzilla.
We get some violence in this movie for sure. That's one of my favorite aspects of the final fight, especially. Like it gets violent and gooey and gory. I see. Anytime you can bring blood into a Godzilla fight, it just makes it more awesome. Like the bloodiest is still like the Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla '74 when he's just spraying blood out his neck. Or was that Gigan where he's spraying it? I think he's
He
doing a little
does
bit.
it in both.
Okay, yeah. So like when he just starts, blood just starts spraying everywhere, and he's like, he gets up, and you just see blood all over him. Like I like when Godzilla gets like, if he's gonna get in a fight, I want to see him like go through hell. And Mechagodzilla always generally puts them through hell every time they fight. So,
yep, that's true. A female reporter investigating the scientist's activities would have suffered from psychic visions of plants with humanoid faces, compelling her to infiltrate the scientist's laboratory. This gives me Matango vibes.
mm-hmm.
The scientist would have later confessed his intentions, and the finale would have had Godzilla battling a human-faced Biollante who defeats him by searing his flesh with acid. Omori proceeded to modify this script into a working script over a period of 3 years, using his background as a biologist to create a plausible plot involving genetic engineering and botany. In order to preserve the series' anti-nuclear message, he linked the creation of Biollante to the use of Godzilla's cells and replaced Kobayashi's journalist character with Miki Sagusa. He openly admitted that directing a Godzilla film was secondary to his desire to make a James Bond movie, and thus added elements of the spy film genre into the plot, which explains a lot.
Right. It's that Seradian agent again.
And upon being released, this movie was not as successful as people were, or Toho was hoping it would be, which I find it ironic, not to completely quote Andres Perez, but it is ironic that, so let me get this straight. It takes 5 years for Toho to put out a sequel to a successful Godzilla film, but to one that's not so successful, it only takes them 3 years. Where's the logic behind that?
Well, sometimes you just have the story that clicks.
Hopefully Godzilla -1, if it is going to get a sequel, doesn't take 5 years to put out another one. More on that later. Maybe. So yeah, with all that being said, shall we get into our pros?
Yeah, so far I got like 9 kind of in here. I added some more.
Go first.
All right, can I just burn through a bunch of these and you can go?
Go through 2.
Okay, so I'll just go through the first 2. Pro number 1, Biollante herself. I think Biollante is a very interesting kaiju and one I would really like to see again. I mean, I think it's criminal we haven't seen Biollante or another monster like Biollante in a Godzilla film in quite a long time. I mean, I'm not going to count anime trilogy or any of that because, maybe Biollante appeared briefly in that. I don't know, or I can't remember. But, in a live-action Godzilla film, I mean, Biollante only being in one, I feel like is kind of criminal because Biollante, she's really creative. I mean, this goes in other pros, like the special effects around her. I mean, the practical effects, if you look at the behind-the-scenes footage and how many people work to get this thing to move, it is insane because there is so many, working and moving pieces that I just appreciate the hell out of looking at this, special effect. I think Biollante is designed, at least first you get the flower form and then you get the crocodile mouth with the fangs on the outside, which was something that the Heisei series kind of like to do. I mean, Destroya, Space Godzilla kind of had the almost like the Predator mandibles on the side, if you will. So like I said, the special effects look fantastic. That was another one of my pros with this. And then Biollante, of course, she looks great on screen. She's imposing. I think I like how she evolves. I mean, this kind of is the starting of Mothra evolved in other films, but another monster go through numerous forms over the course of the film. I feel like this is kind of where it really kind of takes off, and we get to see different aspects of it. But like I said, Biollante's
Batra shifts form too.
Right. But let's say more than 2, at least.
Okay, yeah.
So I think Biollante starts out as a plant, then kind of is the Little Shop of Horrors monster at one point, and then becomes the flower form, and then achieves her final form, if you will, the crocodilian mouth in that too. And I think having it her the soul of Shirogami's daughter kind of infused with her a bit, I think that is kind of interesting. And plus, like I said, it's a female monster as the villain in the Godzilla film. You don't really get that all too often. I mean, you had it in this one. I guess Mothra was an antagonist to Godzilla, but not quite the villain. And the Mutos, at least one of them was. But you don't really get female Godzilla opponents. Megaguirus, that's another one. But you don't get it all that often. And so I kind of like seeing that too. Godzilla's sort of half sister, if you will.
Yeah, she's his half sister, as far as I'm concerned.
Right, which is why, like, why does she hate him so much? I don't know.
And before we continue, a word from our sponsor. Continue.
Yeah, so like I said, Biollante is a really cool looking monster, and I like her little abilities and that we get to see throughout the film, the little like tentacle arms. And I know Jack is probably watching the comments thinking of like what hentai it reminds him of. So yeah, Biollante is cool. There's some really great looking special effects. And I'll get one more per out of the way since I kind of fuse Biollante and the special effects together. But for me, it's number 2, Godzilla himself. So obviously the design, this is kind of like the design that kind of sticks around for the most. I mean, because it's like the next 2 films, but generally like the design is pretty much the same throughout the most of the Heisei era, if you will. I mean, the face kind of changes a little bit, but this one and Ghidorah are kind of the same design. But Godzilla is great. Definitely looks bigger and feels larger than he did in the previous film.
He's the same size, but he is more
bulky.
He's a little bulkier and he's a little more evenly proportioned throughout his body than the
Right.
previous.
And I like the 85 design quite a bit too, but this is the design I think of when I think of the Heisei era of Godzilla films. So Godzilla is great. You can see his atomic breath and other things, and like he fights pretty well in this movie. And his entrance out of Mount Mihara is my favorite scene in the movie because you get the guys who are just like sitting there and they're trying to stop this bomb from going off, and all of a sudden it just you fucking slob. Where was I at? Yeah, you cut me off. So yeah, like he comes out of Mount Mihara. True, at least you paused. Just so we could hear that disgusting sound, like even longer. But yeah, so Godzilla is great. His entrance out of Mount Mihara, the 2 characters where they're trying to stop the bombs are like, oh shit. Like just
man.
They just know they're fucked. Like as soon as that timer goes off, it's probably one of the most humorous moments. I mean, there are some funny ones. Those are my other pros. Let me just get this one out of the way, and then you go ahead. The humorous moments, whether intentionally funny or not, because you got that moment there. That one gets a big laugh out of me. And another one, the other part where I just laugh my ass off every time I see it, is the death of the Seradian agent, because he just bloops out of screen. Like he's just like, it's like somebody snapped their fingers. He's just gone. There's no agonizing pain or anything. It's just like, boop, and he's just gone. Like it's so simple, and it's just they just jump cutted him out of the film. But I just laugh every time I see it because it's so goofy and kind of cartoony. It just like instantly vaporized. There's no agony or anything like that. It's not like in Watchmen when Dr. Manhattan's born and he's screaming like ah. This thing is just boop, and I don't know. It just makes me kind of laugh. So go ahead. Say some pros.
Well, I kind of did already talk about one pro is the continuity. I really like it. It's really solid. So we'll move on from that.
Okay.
Pro number 2, carrying over from the Return of Godzilla. Pro number 2 is 80s, baby.
Yeah, this is the only one of 2 80s Godzilla films. I feel like this one took so long that it took half the decade to get out.
This movie is also very 80s. In some ways, a little bit more than the Return of Godzilla.
Great practical effects. That was a staple of the 80s.
Well, it's like aside from that, there's a lot of gunfights, and there's a reference to the Lethal Weapon films, which Lethal Weapon 2 had just come out this same year. The music sounds very 80s, which we'll talk about the music in a little bit. I know Sean's probably going to want to.
I love the score. This is it's a very underrated Godzilla score.
The human villain is a dude who's got like a mustache and beard, who's wearing the big sunglasses. He's always carrying a sniper rifle, and he's always showing up at the worst possible time to throw a monkey wrench into everybody's plans.
I do enjoy the Seradian agent in this because he's such an asshole to everyone the entire movie, and then his demise is the funniest thing.
So. He gets an over-the-top death like a lot of 80s action movie villains do. And yes, there is a lot more practical effects and monster gore. So, yeah, this movie is very 80s, and I love it. It's not as over the top 80s as the Return of Godzilla is, fully at least, but it does still carry over that fun 80s charm that makes it that much more fun to watch, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Pro number 3, we can talk about this together, is the music.
Yeah, I'll highlight that one on my pros.
The music was done by Koichi Sugiyama. I believe this was also his only Godzilla film. So that makes...
He did the Dragon Quest franchise.
Yep, I just read that myself. Him and the Return of Godzilla music guy are thus far at this point in the franchise the only two composers to do only one Godzilla movie for the series.
And it's kind of a shame because I like the music in those movies.
I like this score a lot more than the Return of Godzilla. This movie, I think, is a lot more varied in terms of its score.
Mm-hmm.
It has a lot of 80s cheesiness to it, but that's fine. I like that.
It has a triumph. I'll say it feels like one of the more triumphant Godzilla scores. It has that sense of adventure to it.
Yeah.
Space. It feels like a big space movie with that kind of music. It feels like something you could see in like Superman the movie or Star Wars. Something
Yeah,
John Williams-esque.
Yeah, it is very John Williams-esque. Like the Super X2 theme, the dun da 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 dun da 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 da. That theme feels just like a Star Wars, Indiana Jones, or Superman theme. Yeah, I agree. But I love it.
You still get some Ufukube music in there just a little bit too, at least for his entrance, which I think was appropriate.
Yep, for his entrance, for I think his rampage in Osaka, there's a little bit of Ifukube music.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a heavily like 80s-ified version of the Godzilla March that plays a few times. Like it first plays when the American agents are trying to steal Godzilla cells at the beginning, and then they get gunned down by the Seradian agent. It plays then there too, and then a few more times throughout the film. But yeah, I like this movie's score a lot. It is creepy and suspenseful when it's trying to be a little scarier and a little more violent. It's big, epic, bombastic, and rousing, for lack of a better term. Shut up. Like especially when Godzilla comes out of Mount Mahara.
Godzilla rises up.
It's badass when Godzilla's just stomping his way through the countryside, blowing down tanks and planes and maser cannons.
I love maser cannons.
It's a little tragic when Biollante is killed at the end of the movie, and when Dr. Shiragami is killed too. Overall, this is a very varied score, in my opinion. It is a shame that this guy did only one Godzilla movie.
But then again, Ifukube came back for most of the rest of the series, except for Space Godzilla, which I do think is probably the weakest of the Heisei scores.
Yeah, so, I would agree too. But
that composer honestly kind of worked on some like he did a couple Godzilla films. He did that one. I think he did Godzilla 2000 and also
the anime trilogy.
But the anime trilogy, like I still like a lot of that music, just not as much. Like anime trilogy's music is probably the best aspect I will give those films. But it doesn't have the classic Godzilla theme, which is a crime in that too, which I think it needed. But yeah, music really, really solid. I would have liked to have seen this composer do at least one more Godzilla film.
But like Seanie Boy said, it was this movie that did inspire Akira Ifukube to return to composing for the Godzilla series. But more on that tomorrow.
Tomorrow, you're only a day away. Okay. I guess one of my next pros, I think we already kind of mentioned this earlier and discussed it, was for me was the continuity and kind of following up on previous event like story threads and actually following up on them, because this is kind of like something that the Showa era didn't really do all that often. You got a little bit in Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla with some of the fallout there, or going from Mothra vs. Godzilla to Ghidorah to the three-headed monster. you kind of get a few little passing references, but this is the first one where that's actually like the events of the previous film like lead to some like substantial plot. Like they explore different elements of the fallouts of the previous film quite a bit in this one. So that's one thing I do love about the Heisei era is the continuity. Granted, time travel kind of tweaks things a little bit if you kind of get into the crazy shenanigans of that, but I do appreciate it having more of a consistent tone and like these all feel genuine sequels in a lot of ways. So I like the continuity and just kind of exploring the plot threads with that. So that was another one of my pros.
Yeah, I agree. The continuity for the Showa series, it is there. It's kind of like the Showa Gamera series. They don't make any specific references, but you definitely can feel there's a progression. Um, I already talked about the continuity, but I just want to add a little bit more to it. But that also goes into the tone, which is my next pro, but that kind of carries from the continuity. This movie does what I think a lot of good sequels do in that it carries over many elements from its predecessor. And one big one for me, in my opinion, is the look and tone. Similar to the Return of Godzilla, this is a very gloomy, it's not a dark visual movie, but it's not the most colorful, but that actually helps to enhance the film's look and feel. Um, it's not a very brightly colored film. Like whenever it's daylight, it's very gloomy, very cloudy and overcasty. And even when the sun is out, there still is a lot of clouds in the sky.
Mm-hmm.
I think like the brightest day scene is when Miki Sagusa tries to use her psychic abilities on Godzilla. But for the most part, it's a very gray, cloudy, and gloomy film. And then at night, the sky is pitch black, except for fire that's making the sky look orange, or Biollante's power making the place look kind of like have a greenish tinge to it. Or when Godzilla is being rained on and then having the artificial lightning blasted upon him. It's a very blue, kind of a dark blue scene, but I really like the color and tone of this movie. It feels like again the natural continuation of its predecessor, and it enhances the look and feel. It's dark, it's gloomy, it's kind of violent. It's a bit not quite apocalyptic, but it just kind of feels like we've been waiting for this for years, and now it's finally here. The thing we've been dreading for so long is finally happening, and it sucks.
Mm-hmm.
So I really like that about this movie's tone. It's great. And I know Seanie Boy is wanting to talk about this a little bit. It does also have some snippets of like a horror movie
Yep,
feel.
that was one of my other pros. The horror, like especially the scene when Biollante kills those people in the lab. Like that's the scene that always stuck out to me pretty substantially. Just like you're just sitting
Yep.
there and you have people gunning each other down, then this plant carnivorous monster. I mean, it also has elements of Frankenstein. Like Shiragami is kind of like a Dr. Frankenstein
Yeah,
in a
that's
lot of
what it
ways.
comes off more to me as is Frankenstein.
So
I don't really have anything to say about the horror tones other than I like them.
right,
It's a new thing that the Godzilla franchise. Well, there have been horror elements
since the
in
beginning. I mean, look at the first movie.
yeah,
Just the
but
dread of it all.
this, I mean, it literally is an 80s monster movie. Like this is almost like a step up from like the 80s Blob or
Mm-hmm.
I think a close comparison is David Cronenberg's The Fly
Good movie.
or if The Little Shop of Horrors was to be made into a horror film, like a legit horror film. And I like that about this too. It's not a
Mhm.
pro by any means, but I do like that about this. This was the era of practical effects heavy Monster on the Loose movies.
Right, right. It's pure 80s. Like this one just
Yeah,
bleeds
it
80s all
feels
over it.
literally and figuratively bleeds
Mm-hmm.
80s.
Yes. So all right. Next pro I'm going to go with is the violence in this movie, especially the final. Like, I mean, I guess you can violence in action scenes, but I mean, some of the action bits, like I mean, with the Super X2, which is another one of my pros, I'll just combine these two. So the Super X2, obviously, not as I think the Super X1, like when that theme music pops up, it felt a little bit more iconic. Super X2 is the one that I feel like kind of gets forgotten about between the three different versions. Obviously, Super X1, yeah, that iconic music that kind of accompanies it, and you see the abilities that it does. And then Super X2, which I still like, but I feel like 3 is the one. 2 is kind of like the middle child syndrome of the different ones. It doesn't really like push the envelope as much forward, I feel like. Whereas like 3 try to do something different with the ice abilities and such. But I don't know, like I still like the Super X2 and I like the fights it has with Godzilla. I always like when they make some sort of like super vehicle or super weapons to kind of combat Godzilla, because the standard like tanks and planes and all that can get kind of boring. Build a super weapon of sorts. It makes it more fun for the monster. They can actually inflict some sort of damage. So, and Super X2 has a pretty good theme that kind of accompanies it as well. And then my, I guess, kind of final pro, unless I can think of something else for me, is the violence in this movie. The final fight between Godzilla and Biollante definitely gets pretty violent. I mean, it's like things are going through Godzilla's hands. There's all this like shoulder and violence and gory, gooey, nasty stuff that's going on screen, and I'm a sucker for it. I mean, this is fully 1980s, because the 80s all about violence and excess and all that other stuff. I mean, if you're gonna have Godzilla fights, I feel like this is the last truly. I mean, I'm trying to think of what other examples we get super bloody, gooey, violent Godzilla fights in the haste. I mean, maybe at the ending of like Mothra or Godzilla Mothra Battle for Earth when he bites into Batra's neck, but this one feels like it gets like super violent with like the gory, gooey bits that kind of come out.
There's a fair bit of gore in Destroya, I think.
Okay, Destroya is another one too, but I feel like this one like feels more violent with like, I mean, if Jack's still watching, he'll laugh when I say this, with actual penetration going on in the movie. I mean, Biollante penetrates Godzilla numerous times in this film.
GMK has a decent amount of bloodshed in it too.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm just thinking off the top of my head. I mean, but this one I feel like of the Heisei era feels the most violent.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is.
I have to go back and rewatch. It's been like the last time I watched the whole series was like 2021. So I gotta I usually like when a new Godzilla film comes out or something, I try to watch the whole series. But lately, with -1 just coming out, I'm like, you know what? I'll wait till next year and then I'll rewatch them all again. So, but
alrighty,
yeah. Violence. There you go. There's Sean's pros. Finish off your stuff, sir.
Alrighty. Pro number 5. I like the human cast in this film. Now, they're by no means uber special. A lot of people like to praise Dr. Shiragami, or no, not Shiragami, right?
Yeah, he was Erica's dad. He was the only one that, like, him and this rating agent are the only two that really stood out to me in this movie.
Oh, it is Shiragami. Okay. Oh, okay. I got it confused with the Kamen Rider character. Never mind. Yeah, a lot of people like to praise Dr. Shiragami. I think he is an interesting character, but I don't think he's as interesting as people make him out to be, because his kind of character isn't something uber new. He is a little bit like Japanese modern day Dr. Frankenstein, a little bit. He's meddling with forces that he knows that he shouldn't meddle with, but he's doing it anyway because of his inability to get over the death of his daughter.
Mm-hmm. This is where we need Jeff Goldblum to come in and be like, yeah, sure, Gami, if you're so preoccupied with whether or not you didn't stop to think if you should.
Yeah, pretty much. And in that aspect too, yeah, even though this came out before Jurassic Park, it does bring to mind that typical cliche of scientists playing with forces that they don't fully understand. And well, Shiragami is sympathetic, and sure, he was doing it with good intentions. In the end, it of course did end up blowing up in his face, and in some ways, it cost him his own life.
Mm-hmm.
I can see that there might be a parallel or two between Shiragami and Dr. Serizawa, because they're both traumatized scientists that create these potentially like catastrophic weapons that mankind wants to get their hands on and use for their own purposes, and they're both really afraid of their potential power. Although Shiragami might be a little bit more tragic than Dr. Serizawa because his weapon, it does get into the hands of other world leaders, at least temporarily, and it does end up to his own demise. So, yeah, might be big words, but that's just my opinion. So he is interesting, but I just don't think he's as interesting. He's also not in the movie as much. Like he's not the main character of the film. Although you could argue there really is no main character. This movie definitely has an ensemble cast, but um and also the my favorite character is Colonel Gondo. I think he more so is the closest thing that we get to a main character for this movie. It's either him or Dr. Kirishima, who is also an interesting character, but he not interesting, but he's kind of fun. But he's a little bit more on the bland side. I find that it's Colonel Gondo who's the more fun of the two main characters. He's the guy who sees the timer for the Mount Mahara bomb and he just goes, "Amen." And that kind of is his trait throughout the film. He's kind of a smartass. Like his first scene, he's on the phone with somebody saying, "Yeah, I've been sitting around here on my ass being bored to tears for 5 years waiting for Godzilla to arrive. And then I'm being demoted so that I can be bored to tears just sitting at a desk and doing paperwork. Yay!" And the whole movie, he has like this. Hold that thought. Let's
I'll
not
tell you.
do that.
For a second, you're gonna stand up and fart on camera or something because your ass was like right in the camera. It's like,
hey, don't tempt me. Anyway,
oh god, at least I can smell it from here.
Speaking of which,
is that your second one on camera? Did you chug the other one already?
Yeah. Anyway, where was I? Oh, Colonel Gondo. And then throughout the film, he just keeps throwing out these witty, smart-ass quips all throughout the film, and he is a lot of fun to watch and listen to. And his last line that he lets out before he's killed by Godzilla, after he and a couple other people inject Godzilla with anti-nuclear energy bacteria, Godzilla roars at him, and then he fires a capsule into Godzilla's mouth. Then he says, medicine should be taken orally. It's more effective that way. Stick to smoking, Mr. Godzilla? And then Godzilla just kills him. So Gondo's a fun character. And he would also have an impact on the Godzilla franchise or the Heisei series later down the line. But more on that when we get to that movie. So overall, yeah, I like the human cast. I do like there, once again, is a sense of camaraderie. Now that Godzilla has been let loose back onto Japan, and they've had 5 years to prepare for when/if that would happen. Now there's a lot of plans set in motion, and there's been a lot of preparations made for the eventual return of Godzilla. So now, and one thing you definitely, in my opinion, can't deny, in the Return of Godzilla, Japan definitely was kind of caught with its pants down. In this movie, they've had 5 years to prepare, so they're a lot more ready for Godzilla's return, so they don't feel like they're scrambling left and right like they were in the Return of Godzilla.
It's like in King of the Monsters, right? We're going for the 5-year jump in movies. Although now that Monarch is out, which the finale is coming out tonight, which I can't wait to watch. So, but had some stuff going on between the 5 years. But you get the point. 5 years between like continuity Godzilla films. So
yeah, it takes advantage of that 5-year time jump. So it feels like Japan has more of their ship put together. They have the Maser tanks, which make a return since
because we had some laser. We had laser stuff in.
We had like sort of laser.
Yeah, because they had the red lasers, but they weren't pure masers. I love the masers. Like the masers first came out in like War of the Gargantuas, and I'm a sucker for them.
We haven't seen them, I think, since Godzilla versus Gigan.
You might be right on that, or maybe Megalon. I don't remember.
No, yeah, I think it was. Maybe it was Megalon, but
Because I don't. They weren't in Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. I remember that.
no.
And
Actually, I think it was Megalon because they used stock footage from Kaiju there too. But
what
anyway, so
that movie's a lot of stock footage. I mean, Gigan and Megalon are an awful lot of stock footage, and a lot of it does not match up very well. But I
yeah.
still have a soft spot for those movies.
So beside the point, yeah, we finally see the return of the Maser cannons in this film. And then we have, of course, the Super X2, which I like the Super X2, but I don't have it quite as a pro. Although I do like it. It's probably my least favorite of the three Super X's.
I'd agree too, because like 1 and 3, I think, because it's the middle child thing, because it doesn't really like it's sort of upgraded from the first one, but
well, the only way that it's upgraded
like
is
remotely.
that it's a drone. Yeah, essentially, it's a big giant drone. It's smaller.
And hey, they predicted drones.
Yeah. It's smaller, it's faster, it's more nimble and agile, and it has a trump card weapon in the form of the fire mirror, which I think is a really cool concept, although it proves to not be effective. Well, it is effective, but not for very long against Godzilla.
Right. Godzilla's just too strong.
It does definitely come off as being the weakest of the three Super X models, but it is still cool. And watching Godzilla fight it is a lot of fun.
Right.
But yeah, sorry. What was I talking about?
Oh yeah, Mechagodzilla is your favorite character.
The human cast I do think is quite strong. And the last thing that I like, not only have they had 5 years to prepare, which is nice, there is a lot of that camaraderie amongst all the characters, at least on the military side of things. The JSDF they're trying their best to put their heads together to come up with some kind of idea to thwart Godzilla from attacking this, direct Godzilla's attention here, try this weapon, try this weapon, try this plan with these weapons.
A belch meter on screen or something.
They just keep coming up with these ideas, and it's fun. It's a fun sense of camaraderie, and thankfully, honestly, I think again, at least on the military side, the Heisei series does a good job of consistently like having the military have their shit together and combating Godzilla. So it's a good start here. Pro number 6, anti-nuclear energy bacteria itself, I think, is a really cool concept. Not much is done with it, and sadly, the series doesn't really do anything with it for the rest of the series. I think that is due to the death of Dr. Shiragami. But Anib itself, I think, is a cool concept. It is based on a real-life bacteria. There is a species of bacteria that feeds on oil. This is what takes care of oil spills in the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
What the hell is that?
That's the sound of running water.
Oh, and you live with that? That's terrible.
No, that's the toilet's flushed or something. So.
Oh, okay. Anyway, so yeah, there's a species of oil that keep getting distracted. There's a species of bacteria that feeds on oil and petroleum products, and this is what kind of curbs oil slicks out in the ocean if they were to ever occur. And I would assume that's what they somewhat based anti-nuclear energy bacteria on. But to have a biological compound that feeds on nuclear waste and nuclear energy, I think is a cool concept. Not only practically, in case there ever was a nuclear meltdown, but the idea of taking that and using it as a biological weapon against Godzilla is kind of a no-brainer. And this is the one, and so far, I think, only time where mankind has ever attempted to use biological warfare on Godzilla.
Not counting the Super X.
No.
Or not the Super, the Oxygen Destroyer. We're talking Super X and That
Yeah. Also,
well, actually,
even
technically,
then,
they used the cadmium stuff with kind of chemical-based weapons, but
yeah,
not
that
biological.
same for oxygen destroyer. That's a chemical compound, not
Okay,
a
yeah,
biological one.
biological warfare. Yes, this would probably be the only instance. But then again, it's
It
fired
is,
through like a missile. Whatever. Chemical, biological, a lot of the same shit, but kind of not. I don't know. Fuck it.
Not much to say about Aneb other than I think it's a cool concept. It's unique, it's original, and yeah, it's cool. Pro number 7 is the fun human action scenes. There's a few gunfights in this movie that feel straight out of an 80s action movie like Predator or Commando.
Not as fun.
No, not as fun, but they are still fun for the Godzilla series. You know, you see people getting shot. You don't see blood. You don't see gunshot wounds. You just kind of see them.
You know what I just thought of, Nick? A Paul Verhoeven Godzilla movie.
That would
Would
be
be
savage.
That would be let him go unhinged and unleashed. Like, oh, that sounds great. I mean, the closest you can argue is like Starship Troopers with the creatures, but that movie's awesome. And
That movie is awesome.
We
Watch
gotta
my
talk
review of it from last year.
Oh
But
yeah.
anyway,
we gotta talk more Verhoeven stuff. We should talk Total Recall at some point.
I'll think about it. Anyway, so yeah, not much to say, but there's a few human action scenes. They're kind of short. They're kind of sporadic throughout the film, but they are still fun. They do feel like, yeah, like I said, Commando or Lethal Weapon or any cheesy 80s action movie. But if you take that and mix it with an 80s Godzilla movie, it does feel appropriate. Pro number 8 is the fun monster action. When with Godzilla and Biollante, well, Biollante doesn't really go on a rampage. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But when she attacks the agents in Dr. Shirogami's home, it's a brief scene, but it is still pretty cool. Watching her wrap up and constrict people with her tentacles is fun. But Godzilla's attack on the
Osaka?
Japanese Navy in the ocean, and then attacks Osaka, and then goes on his rampages throughout the film. Then his fights with the military, they're a lot of fun. This movie also starts the trend of not only do they consistently show the JSDF has their shit together, this starts the trend of having very entertaining Godzilla versus military battles throughout the Heisei series. And honestly, I think Godzilla 2000 was the last one to have really entertaining military battles with with Godzilla in the series. But this is where it starts truly. Like the last movie was decent, but this is where it truly starts to get entertaining, in my opinion. And yeah, all the monster action is really fun. Pro number 9 is the fun monster battles. We have 2 monster fights in this movie: Godzilla versus Biollante's Rose form, and then Godzilla versus Biollante's final form. Both are somewhat short, and both kind of do the same thing, where Biollante mainly uses her vines to attack Godzilla. Some of them constrict, some of them stab, and some of them bite and spit out acidic plant sap. But they're still a lot of fun to watch, and they're also, quite violent. Godzilla keeps getting scalded and burned with all this acidic tree sap. One he even gets splattered in the face with this acidic slime. And he doesn't lose any eyes, but I do maybe feel like that was a little bit of a reference to the Showa series where Godzilla lost one of his eyes pretty often. He did it in Son of Godzilla, Godzilla versus Hedorah, and Godzilla versus Gigan. But the first one I think is the more stiff of the two, because Godzilla is just kind of fighting against a giant tower that stands still in the middle of Lake Ashi, but still Biollante puts up a decent fight. And watching Godzilla blow apart all these tendrils and tear them to pieces with his atomic breath is a lot of fun. There's some fire and smoke, but there's tons of green blood splattering all over the place, and it's gooey and carnage candy galore. It's a lot of fun. And Godzilla's final fight with Biollante's final form is also a lot of fun too. This one is also a little bit short, but it's vicious, hard hitting, and surprisingly, I think Godzilla kind of gets his ass kicked a little bit too much, or
Well,
not too much, but he gets hurt quite a bit in this fight. But he also lands some good blows onto Biollante as well, including literally blowing the back of her mouth out. Phallic imagery aside.
you naughty, naughty boy.
And this was also the first time where Godzilla used his nuclear pulse attack. In this movie, he uses it to blow off a bunch of vines that are constricting him around his torso. But yeah,
I like when he uses other attacks that aren't quite, the same ones we normally get, like the nuclear pulse and that too.
Agreed.
So.
Yep.
He needs some more other attacks too, I think. I mean, that short film where he fought, I think Megalon, he uses like a falcon punch, like an atomic punch. I'm like, that was pretty cool. I want to see some more shit like that.
Yep, I agree. That's a discussion for another day. But yeah, the monster fights are a lot of fun. They're a bit short, but they're unique, dynamic, entertaining, violent, and fun. Pro number 10 is Godzilla himself. Yeah, this is the debut of. Now, Godzilla's design would kind of have some subtle changes all throughout the rest of the series, but this is where it started being truly consistent, and this is the one that cements the Heisei Godzilla look.
Right. It's pretty much the look that they roll with through most of it. I mean, obviously there's some tweaks in it, but it's still kind of the main design.
This design specifically is known as the Biogoji design. This design is a big fan favorite amongst Godzilla fans, and I see why. I really dig the Biogoji design. Godzilla's face is like his face and muzzle is made to look a lot more cat-like.
Yeah, that's what like. I get the cat kind of like look with his face, look like a panther or something.
Yeah, a panther or a jaguar or maybe a little bit of a lion, but because like he's got little ears, he's got that.
There's always a lot of debate about Godzilla having ears too. Some people like it, some people hate it. I'm like, I always like to have it just a little bit. I feel like Final Wars has the ears, right? Like that's the last one where it's pretty noticeable.
Final Wars does have ears, yeah.
Right.
And he probably, I think that was the last one to have ears. I don't mind the ears. I could just take them or leave them. I don't really notice. But anyway, yeah, his jaw is a lot longer and a little slimmer, so Godzilla's mouth is a lot more pronounced. His body is more equally proportioned. Like I think it's obvious that the 84 Goji is like very bottom heavy. Like he's got the thunder thighs and the huge tail, and a lot of his spines are larger on the lower portion of his body. Whereas this design, yeah, he's more evenly sized. His spines are more or less the same size on his back until they taper along his tail. His arms are a little longer. His shoulders are a little beefier. His legs are a little bit longer, and his body weight seems to be more evenly spread out throughout his entire frame. It feels a lot more refined.
Burp number 12? Jeez.
It feels a lot more refined and a lot smoother compared to the last movie's design, which I like the 84 Goji design, but it definitely is kind of experimental and prototypey. This one feels more fleshed out and more well thought out. And they do, well, actually, no, I'll talk about that in just a minute. But yeah, my favorite aspect of the Biogoji design are his eyes. they're kind of sunken into his head, and he has like really big eyebrows. So whenever you look at him face on, especially during the day, it almost looks like he doesn't have eyes.
Right.
And that makes him look a bit creepier and angrier, in my opinion. But also makes him look more badass. So yeah, Godzilla is just a total juggernaut. Anything the military has to throw at him, he just tanks it like a badass. Even the fire mirror, which appears to be a pretty effective weapon,
He melts it.
yeah, he just keeps on going no matter what. Rockets, missiles, tank shells, bullets, bombs, heat rays, sap, bites, constrictions. Godzilla just keeps on going. He asses his way through everything in his way. And
He's
so
a pretty resilient monster.
yeah, so Godzilla shows up at 39 minutes and 42 seconds into this film.
He has a great entrance, one of his best.
Oh yeah, he has an amazing entrance coming out of Mount Mahara with the Akira Ifukube music. But he is also on screen pretty often throughout the rest of the film once he arrives.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, if this is like one of the highest rated Godzilla movies where he has a fair amount of screen time.
I think Mechagodzilla 2 might be the movie he has the most screen time in.
I think you're right. That's a big reason why I love that movie. But
It's like, it doesn't waste any time. It's like, fuck it. You want to see more Godzilla? Here you go.
I think this one might not be too far behind, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And also, the movie literally is about him, especially once he shows up. So it definitely does not skimp on Godzilla.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, he's a lot of fun in this movie. Pro number
I feel like
10.
Like, how many pros you got?
I have 3 more.
Holy shnikes!
I have 12.
I am 12.
Pro number 10 is Biollante herself. I love this monster. I have one issue with her. But Biollante as a kaiju, I think this one is a better image.
Yeah, I mean, this one you can't really get much. Little shop of horrors.
I think it emulates that more than it does the movie itself. But anyway, yeah, I love Biollante. I think Biollante would be a great big bad to introduce into the MonsterVerse.
I know Mike Doherty really wanted to bring in Biollante. If he like the monsters he wants to bring in the most that he hasn't had the chance to, Biollante, the Gargantuas,
and well. I think.
Yeah, I mean Gigan. I feel like Gigan's got to be like a final tier threat. Gigan or Space Godzilla, I think, would be the last.
Or Biollante.
Oh yeah, or Destroya, obviously. But Destroya is kind of like the one people think of as like the final thing. But I don't know. We'll see.
Anyway,
or something original.
I love Biollante's design. I love her concept, a literal man-made monster. Also a biological monster as well. A spin-off from Godzilla himself. I also really like that aspect about her too. She's his half-sister. I don't give a fuck what anybody says. It literally just is Godzilla cells mixed with plant cells. I don't give a fuck.
Technically, Orga kind of utilizes G cells as well, but would you really call it? Orga's already like existing. Yeah, like a clone.
You could argue that about Biollante as well. So maybe
I feel like we need. I mean, the closer we get Godzilla versus Godzilla, I mean, Mechagodzilla obviously with him versus Kiryu, but we need like 2 actual like Godzillas in a movie. I think. I mean, Junior, yeah, but like 2 adult-sized Godzillas or something. We need Mrs. Godzilla.
You could say Space Godzilla too.
Oh yeah, that's true. But like actual just Godzillas, not Space Godzillas, not Mecha, but like 2 actual members of the Godzilla species.
I'd like to see that too. Yeah.
We need Mrs. Godzilla at some point.
Admittedly, I don't have much to say about Biollante by herself without getting into my last pro number 12 is the special effects. Debuting Koichi Kawakita into the Godzilla franchise, he would stick around until Rebirth of Mothra 2.
Mm.
More on that later.
Nick's favorite series, clearly better than the Gamera trilogy of the 90s, according to him.
Nope. Anyway, but Kawakita does have a very strong debut, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. And they had time to work on their effects, because you look at the other Heisei films, they're really rushed in their post-production time.
In the last couple of them, yeah, definitely. But he actually, had a lot of time to work on his shit with this film. I have watched all the special features for this disc, and I do know that at some point they did consider using stop motion for Godzilla and Biollante, and they kept some test footage. It's on this DVD if you can ever get your hands on it and check it out.
Good
It
luck.
looks cool, but I am glad that they did not go with stop motion.
Godzilla's just the pseudomation's just the iconic stuff. Like that's one of the reasons we like it, because like it's pseudomation, it's like more tangible movements and all that too. So
Yeah, and I just kind of think I think stop motion is better for like King Kong and other monsters like that.
yeah, like Jason and the Argonauts or like Ray Harryhausen era. Like that's where I like stop motion the most. And we did get Godzilla doing one stop motion kick in King Kong versus Godzilla,
and it looks like shit. But anyway, yeah, the effects in this film are fantastic. The Biogoji suit looks phenomenal. All the miniature sets look great. The fire mirror. Well, the fire mirror does look cool. The Super X2 looks great. The countryside sets all look really great. The Maser tanks look great. All the regular tanks and the missile launchers all look really good. The explosions are phenomenal. The fire effects are really good too. The gore effects are great. There's a lot of okay, so we may as well talk about Biollante in terms of effects. Okay, so Koichi Kawakita, who had previously worked for Tsuburaya Productions, replaced Teruyoshi Nakano as head of the series' special effects unit after Toho became impressed at his work in the film Gunhead, which is another Toho film that I have no desire to ever see. Kawakita made use of Gunhead's special effects team, Studio OX, and initially wanted to make Godzilla more animal-like, using crocodiles as references, but was berated by Tomoyuki Tanaka, who declared Godzilla to be a monster rather than an animal. What an asshole. I don't like Tomoyuki Tanaka very much. Kenpachiro Satsuma returned to portray Godzilla, hoping to improve his performance by making it less anthropomorphic than in previous films. Suit maker Nobuyuki Yasumaru created a Godzilla suit made specifically with Satsuma's measurements in mind, which is good. Unlike the previous one, which was initially built for another suit actor. The resulting 242-pound suit proved more comfortable than the last, having a lower center of gravity and more mobile legs.
242 is a heavy amount of weight you're moving around.
That's actually an average weight for a Godzilla suit. A second 176-pound suit was built for outdoor underwater scenes. The head size was reduced and the whites around the eyes were removed. Godzilla does have like orange black eyes in this film, which also helps to make at times look like Godzilla has no eyes. There were also a lot of animatronic models used for close-up shots of Godzilla's face. Thankfully, they ditched the Cybot Godzilla, which is cool, but definitely is also very prototypey. And they also matched the suit design a lot better than the Cybot 84 Goji suit did. Like, not at all. The suit's dorsal plates were filled with light bulbs for scenes in which Godzilla uses his atomic ray, thus lessening the reliance on optical animation. Though they electrocuted Satsuma the first time they were activated, and Satsuma was also obliged to wear protective goggles when in the suit during scenes in which Godzilla battles the JSDF, as real explosives were used on set. Designing and building the Biollante props proved problematic as traditional Sunimation techniques made realizing the requested design for the creature's first form difficult, and the resulting cumbersome model for Biollante's final form was met with disbelief from the special effects team. Biollante's first form was performed by Masao Takegami, who sat within the model's trunk area in the lower part of Biolante's form on a platform just above water level. While the creature's head movements were simple to operate, its vines were controlled by an intricate array of overhead wires, which proved difficult for Satsuma to react to during combat scenes as they offered no tension, thus warranting Satsuma to feign receiving blows from them, despite not being able to perceive them. Biolante's final form was even more difficult to operate as its vine network took hours to rig up on set, and visibility in both the Godzilla and final form Biolante suits was poor, thus causing difficulties for Takegami in aiming the creature's head when firing its Biolante's radioactive acidic sap, which permanently stained anything it landed on. While it was initially decided to incorporate stop motion animation into the film, the resulting sequences were scrapped as Kawakita felt that they failed to blend in with the live action footage effectively. Yeah, he's not wrong. It looks cool, but it just doesn't fit, in my opinion.
Yeah, we'll get to some of my what kind of nitpicks like with some of the effects at times because there's some great looking practical stuff, and then there's other times, like there's one noticeable thing where Godzilla's swimming and it's just this really bad looking shadow.
We'll talk about that later. The film, however, became the very first of its kind to use CGI, though its usage was limited to scenes involving computer generated schematics, and probably a couple scenes where Godzilla fires his atomic breath.
Right. So, and honestly, like I said, they used it smartly. They didn't do like the full blown CGI Godzilla that we'd see in like Godzilla 2000, where it looks pretty bad.
Dated.
Mm-hmm.
But also a fun fact: the model for Biolante's final form required 32 wires to operate. So surely that must have been a gargantuan pain in the ass. Overall, the special effects in this film are outstanding. There's some of my favorite effects in the entire Godzilla franchise. They're breathtaking. They're very unique. They're very well done. And a lot of fun to watch. Overall, 80s, baby. Gotta love it. Alrighty. I have 3 nitpicks, and one of them has a couple aspects to it. And I have only one con, but it's not a big con.
Let's get your con out of the way. Let's hear it. What is it, Nick?
No, I want to save it for last.
Okay. I guess I'll just kind of breeze through some of my stuff. So these all kind of like, I mean, one of them I just kind of mentioned is some iffy effects at times. And the most notable one is Godzilla swimming in that one shot. That's just a really obviously like painted shot. I don't know what it is that they were doing with it, but it just looks noticeably like really off. It doesn't feel like a necessary shot that they could have just cut it from the movie. And I think it would have, it's the most noticeable part in the movie. It's just that shadow swimming over water. And it does not look good. It's not to say that they can't do swimming and water sequences in Godzilla films because they've done it before. Ebirah Horror of the Deep obviously had some pretty iconic looking ones, and other tokusatsu films have had water sequences that are like War of the Gargantuas has some noticeable like fights in the water. That shot that always sticks with me is that shot of like Gyra like reaching up, like when the guy looks overboard and you just kind of look down over like the side and he's just kind of looking right up at the guy. Like, I mean, it's like he probably could have done something like that. That's the one iffy effect that just sticks out to me as just not that great, but it's more like a nitpick than a con because I think a lot of the practical effects look really good in this thing. Outside of I mean, I'll say another one that's kind of a thing that kind of like goes in pace with my main issue, which for me, my main issue of the film is the pacing, and I feel like the movie drags at times, and I think the reason for it is this film doesn't have like too many interesting characters to kind of follow. along. I mean, Shiragami kind of is, and the serrating agent kind of cracks me up. But outside of that, I mean, there's the one guy you mentioned a second ago. It just doesn't really have that, like, I mean, Miki Saigusa appears first, but she's just kind of barely in the movie, all things considered. And like you said before, I think she's like a more of a plot device than anything else. But not too many people really stand out all that much within this movie. There's a few funny moments, and you get the sense of camaraderie at times, but nobody that's like entirely like the most interesting protagonist like within the Godzilla franchise. I feel like the next movie had a lot more interesting characters to follow that just kind of stand out a bit more. This one, I just feel like I think that's part of why the pacing feels like super slow is because I'm following people I don't care as much about as I do in some other Godzilla films. And I think that's what kind of drags it down times because it does take a while, it feels like, for Godzilla to kind of get going and doing his thing. Yes, when he finally does show up, he does do a lot of stuff and it's great to watch. And he has a fantastic entrance out of Mount Mihara. But like I said, I really just feel kind of the pacing at times within this film just kind of drags it down. Like sometimes like it does take a while to get going because like this is a movie where like I think of like, yeah, I should like this movie more than I do because when I think of all the ideas and a lot of the good stuff it does, but then when I actually sit down and kind of watch it, I'm reminded, oh yeah, that's right. A lot of the stuff does kind of drag or it's not as exciting as other films in the series. And that's kind of one of my that's the thing that always like holds it back for me is, like I said, a lot of that pacing. And I think just the less interesting people to follow in terms of Godzilla film. Because, I mean, like I said, the next movie, I think, had a more interesting cast and memorable stuff that goes on with the human element. This one, not quite as much outside of maybe Shiragami and the Serradian agent. But, I mean, everyone else just kind of feels, I barely remember anyone's name this time around when I watch it. And that's not always the case with Godzilla films because there are characters I do remember or just have like a good on-screen presence. Like here, it just didn't feel it as much. I think they did get better in the next film, but this one just doesn't stand out quite as much to me. So yeah, that's really kind of it in terms of my cons or nitpicks. Nothing like too major, but that's just where they all kind of link together in a way. So
nitpick number one, I do agree that the pacing is a little hit or miss. It's mainly just in all the scenes before Godzilla shows up.
yes, and that is a large chunk of the movie because this is a pretty long Godzilla movie, all things
It's an
considered.
hour and 44 minutes.
It feels long compared to like other ones.
It does feel kind of long, but it's yeah, all the stuff before Godzilla. Now, I don't mind it as much because I'm interested in the build up and intrigue with Dr. Shiragami creating Biollante and all the arms race stuff with all these corporations fighting over Godzilla cells. I think is interesting. And there's a couple, human action scenes leading up to that release of Godzilla. But I do recognize that maybe it could have had like 2 minutes or so just kind of shaved out throughout the course of
The
that.
shot of Godzilla Shadow, we didn't need that. It doesn't really, it's not necessary.
Damn it. Yeah, I think you could have shaved out a couple minutes leading up to Godzilla's reveal. That's it. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. That's where the pacing really kind of irks me a little bit is before Godzilla's released. Once he's out, I love everything that is done with him for the rest of the movie. Just like I can honestly watch Biollante from when Godzilla first arrives to the very end of the film just fine. There's only 1 or 2 moments during before that I can skip, but still, it's not a huge issue, and it's kind of the least nitpicky of the nitpicks. But I do recognize that the pacing is a tiny bit hit or miss. Nitpick number 2, there are some horrendous English dialogue in this movie.
See, I just watched the dub version, so I mean,
I didn't. I watched Japanese with subtitles. There are some really fucking bad. Namely, whenever Dr. Shiragami is talking to the head of Serradia, whatever the hell he was, I can't understand a single word they're saying.
You know what? I'll say too, with this DVD, there's a lot of subtitle issues with it as well. I feel like sometimes the subtitles pop like you have to be very specific with the settings on it to kind of get the right subtitles. And sometimes I'm like, which setting do I? Sometimes they pop up at times, and then other times they don't. I don't know. It's just kind of a messy thing I noticed with this DVD.
My little issue I have with the subtitles. So I choose Japanese 5.1, and then there's the option where it's a direct translation of the Japanese dialogue. So I go for that.
Mm-hmm.
My main issue, there are some spelling errors throughout the film. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but I do remember seeing a line, and I'm just like, oh, that's not pronounced right, or that's not spelled right.
Mm-hmm. You know,
Uh,
was it? I think this is the first Godzilla film where there's this. It starts the trend where it's just straight up dubbing. Right? There's no like cuts or anything like that. Like the English dub is straight from like the Japanese.
oh, yeah, huh? This was
So that's one thing I know because like Return of Godzilla, obviously there's the Raymond Burr version and that as well. But this is the first one where we don't have like alternating versions of a Godzilla movie. This is like from this point on.
Well, Godzilla 2000.
Oh, Godzilla 2000. Yeah, you're right. You're right. But you can still watch that. Damn it, you're right. I feel like this is the first one that kind of like, at least with the Heisei era, where the rest of it just kind of went like straight things. Because Godzilla 2000, you're right. And although Godzilla 2000, I think even the director prefers the American cut because of the additions with the improved sound design and kind of pacing of it. And that's like when I saw Godzilla 2000 in theaters, it took them a while to like, that was an interesting experience. Like for the Fathom event, because they didn't play the Godzilla 2000 version, they played the Millennium cut, if you will. And
Japanese cut, that's lame.
Right. I that's one of the versions where I prefer the English cut because it's a little bit more fun. It's paced a lot better. There's an improved sound design for that. It's just a better made version because they had more time to kind of tweak and fix some things, which is one of those rare instances where the English cut is better than the Japanese cut. I mean, Mothra vs. Godzilla is another one I feel like is right up there because it has more action. But I mean, you can kind of go either or with that. But this is one.
So yeah, there is some really bad for the Japanese audio. There is some really, really bad English dialogue in this movie. It's damn near incomprehensible at times. Mm-hmm. I hate to say it, but I think Dr. Shiragami, whenever he speaks English, he's the worst because his accent is so thick you cannot understand a word he's saying.
See, with dub, I don't like if it's bad. I'm like, well, it's just the dub. But I do love some of like the Heisei dubs crack me up a lot of the times.
This does start the trend of really bad English dialogue popping up in future Godzilla movies. We'll talk about more with the next movie. Shut it. Don't even say it. I know you want to. I know by the shit-eating grin on your face. I know what you want to say. Don't even.
Take that, you dinosaur.
You fucker. The last nitpick that I have, there are some special effects hiccups.
You can tell your son about it when he's born, Major Spielberg.
Not as much as the last movie.
It's a dinosaur, a gigantic dinosaur. It's attacking our boys. A dinosaur? What?
Damn it, I have no knives in here.
All right, I'll let you keep going because when this is done, I got to watch the new Monarch.
All right, I'm about done. So, yeah, there are some effects hiccups, namely the shot when the Super X2 is underwater and it fires torpedoes and missiles at Godzilla underwater. It's very obvious that it's just the Super X in like a dark room and they have a water filter on screen. Mm-hmm. It's a very quick shot, but it doesn't look great. Speaking of underwater, there is a shot where Godzilla is done in stop motion and he's swimming underwater away from some planes, and it doesn't look great at all. Once again, it's a quick shot, but it looks awful. It sticks out like a sore thumb. It's very jarring, and it's extremely poorly done. Yeah, they could have just removed that scene. Just cut it out of the movie. And the last one, this could not be avoided. And thankfully, because the movie is so dark, the strings can be hidden. But there are some shots where Biolante's tendrils are obviously being pulled around on strings.
But given how complicated that prop is and general like that special effect, I'm cutting some slack because that is
Yeah,
like
I am too. And that's why it's a nitpick. And like I said, it couldn't be avoided, but
eh,
I'll just point it out.
right,
It
right.
is
That's
obvious, but I give them some slack because of the type of monster they're trying to
mhm.
execute here. The one con that I have with this movie, and it's not a big one, but it is a noticeable con. This movie is called Godzilla versus Biollante, and Godzilla is fantastic in this movie. And when Biollante is on screen, she's also great. But she's only in maybe 6 or 7 minutes of the entire hour and 44-minute long film. And that's a little disappointing.
Mhm.
When she is on screen, she does make a big impact. And, I love Godzilla and Biolante's final fight. I love her roar. I love her design. I love the effects. Biolante's a cool monster. But I think we should have seen Biollante go on at least one rampage, like Biolante's final form, going on a little rampage, destroying a city, and then Godzilla wakes up from his bacteria coma to kill Biollante and then head off into
Right,
the ocean.
right. Biollante only like kind of kills like it's more small scale with Biollante. Like Godzilla's wrecking the cities and Biollante is just kind of I'm just gonna chill here for a bit.
Yeah, it's a little disappointing in hindsight. Again, I love Biollante whenever she's on screen. She's just not on screen enough. And I don't think she has that big of an impact on the film itself. It kind of does feel like, for the most part,
It's two
Return of
separate
God,
movies.
not quite so much two separate films, but it kind of feels like Return of Godzilla 1.5 with another monster thrown in minorly.
Mhm.
Not a huge issue. I still like Biolante's placement in the story. I just wish we could have seen more of her.
Right, right.
So, Seanie Boy, final thoughts on Godzilla versus Biollante?
Well, I think Godzilla vs. Biollante, I think I'd agree with you. It is an underappreciated one that doesn't get talked about as much as I think it does, like, deserves. I mean, it's not necessarily my favorite in the Heisei era. When I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch all the films, but you'd be kind of surprised where I have this one ranked. I think the concept and that is more interesting sometimes than the execution. And I do think, like I said, the pacing does hurt the film quite a bit for me because it does feel like it really drags like right like the first like 40 or so minutes up until like Godzilla shows up there. A lot of it is kind of held back for me personally, but there's also a lot of really good things it does. Like I said, the score, some of the violent elements to it. There's a bit of unintentionally funny bits with the straighting agent. Boop. I think Biollante is a very interesting monster and some of the story and concept that it has of biologically created giant monsters. I think that's cool. That's like we're taking I mean, this is before Jurassic Park, obviously, but we're taking that genetically engineered stuff and that genetic power, if you will, and putting it into a Godzilla movie. And to me, that's kind of exciting. It's something I want to see explored more in future Godzilla films that they don't really seem to almost like want to. Yeah, we get plenty of mechs, but we don't have like man-made created monsters. Like we don't have the Frankenstein sort of mad scientist effect as much as I think we should.
Well, hey,
So
mechs are awesome.
mechs are awesome. I do love mechs, but I want to see more. I just want to see Biollante again. I think the effect of it, and like the hard work that they put into getting this thing to even just run, like it's insane what they had to do to try and get this thing to like. This is, I think the con like it's a tough thing to pull off, and I think that's why Biollante is not in it as much because that is a damn difficult effect to move around, and you could see the struggles and hardships on like the special features. It's been a while since I watched that, but you can see the struggle of getting this thing to move around and just kind of do anything with it. But I appreciate the concepts in the story and just kind of going in this direction that I would have liked to have seen the Heisei era explore a bit more. But granted, we did get like a lot of classic Toho monsters come back, but I think Biollante was just a really interesting one. And in terms of concept and some of the stuff that they were going for, I think the execution could have been a little bit stronger, but I like the attempt at it that they tried to do with this one. So it's, I still like it. It's just generally like I don't think it's like my favorite in the Heisei era though. So, but still, I enjoyed it overall. So
I love Godzilla versus Biollante. I will say this for the rest of time. This is a criminally underrated Godzilla movie. I am aware it has a lot of fans. I still think it is very underappreciated and very underloved, in my opinion.
because it's hard to find, more people would appreciate it if they had the chance to watch it. I think
That's true. Yeah. I love Godzilla versus Biollante. This is definitely one of my favorite of the Heisei series, but it's easily one of my favorite Godzilla films of the whole franchise. I think it does break my top 10. I love this movie. It's very entertaining. It's very well made, very unique, and very original, which is why I will be giving Biollante a standard 10 out of 10. Not a solid gold 10 out of 10, because the pacing issues and the lack of Biollante do hold the film back from a solid gold 10 out of 10. But I think this film is worthy of a standard 10 out of 10. It's a great film, a great monster movie, a great kaiju film, a great 80s monster movie. It's just an entertaining film. I highly recommend it.
okay, if you want to know my rating, I'm going to go with the 7 out of 10. I think it's pretty good. I think it's pretty good. I think the execution could have been a bit stronger, and like I said, that pacing is things that hold it back for me because it's one of those films where when I think about it and what it tries to do, I'm like, oh, I should like this one more than I do. But then when I actually watch it, that's when I really kind of remember, okay, this is why it's not as high as like some other Godzilla films. But like I said, I really like Biollante and how just creative this monster looks and the concept that they're going for, and kind of the Frankenstein mad scientist has the horror elements, violence, and get 80s injections within it. So it's got a lot of good stuff in it for sure. So
All righty. Anything to plug, Sean?
well, as soon as this video is done, Nick knows I'm going to watch the finale to Monarch's Legacy of Monsters. I don't know if they haven't greenlit season 2 yet, but I'm sure they're going to because it's consistently been Apple's highest rated show for the past couple of weeks. I got to know. I mean, we're going to get Godzilla and Kurt Russell confrontation this episode. So, two of my favorite things. So, I'm once that's done, and then I got to work on that video. So, that'll probably be up either tomorrow or Saturday, but I'm going to try and get that video done faster because what it is like I have to watch the episode, then I let it settle for a minute, then I watch it again and I take a bunch of notes, and then I have to do my recording, and then it's the editing of it all, which is going to take a while. So my goal is to hopefully have that video done maybe by tomorrow night, and then potentially do a stream discussing that, or I might do a spoiler stream or something. I don't know. For that, I do want to like have a season long like discussion on season 1 or something. So look forward to some Monarch stuff this weekend for sure.
Hey, Jacksonites, I hate to break it to you. I haven't seen a single episode of that show.
Right. Because like, I mean,
I need a DVD release.
It will eventually. And when it does,
know that for sure.
Well, because Apple releases their shows on home media, like a lot of them. And I know we're in a scary age with physical media, but I mean, it is the Monsterverse and fans eat that shit. Like the toys are selling like crazy right now. If you can find them.
Alrighty. So, post your comments down below and let me know what you think. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and share this video with your friends. Look forward to the next episode of Super Kaiju Binge, where we tackle a movie that I think I might have an interesting turnaround on.
He's finally coming around.
Maybe.
Take that, you dinosaur.
Maybe. With the next review of Godzilla versus King Ghidorah. And as always, go out and if you see a scientist that might be mixing Godzilla and plant and human DNA,
slap him upside his head because that's a stupid idea.
That's probably not a good idea.
Oh my god, you know what would be creepy if they like just mixed it with the human? And I mean, this is kind of something we talked about with -1, where the horror elements like a humanoid Godzilla, like an actual person, like mutating into a Godzilla. Give me the zombie, like I mean, I'm not a huge zombie fan, but like a zombie-zilla like humanoid thing, like a Godzilla plague. Now that sounds fucked up, which is why I want to see it.
That would be fucked up. And I will see you guys in the next video.
Peace out.